World War II Heritage Centre, also known as Reflections at Bukit Chandu, will reopen its doors to the public from next Thursday. The centre closed in October 2018 and underwent major redevelopment works. New artefacts like bullet cases recovered in an archaeological excavation in 2019 and entrenching tools used by infantry soldiers in the 1940s will be on display for the very first time. The exhibition retells the story of the Malay regiment in the Battle of Pasir Panjang, when its heavily outnumbered soldiers made a heroic last stand against a 13,000-strong Japanese force.
For more, we're joined by Rachel Eng. She's assistant curator from the National Museum of Singapore. Good evening, Rachel. The battle, of course, was part of Japan's final push in the invasion of Singapore in World War II. How significant was the Battle of Pasir Panjang, though, in Singapore's history books?
So just to provide a little bit of context, the battle that we really examine in Reflections of Bukit Chandu is the Battle of Bukit Chandu itself, which was fought just down the hill from the centre. And this was part of the larger Battle of Pasir Panjang, which was, as you've said, the final push of the Japanese towards the city centre. And so while it came at the very last end of the actual battle of Singapore, it is historically significant, I think, in that it was fought largely by local Asian defence soldiers. Although there were some, of course, British and Australian troops, this was something that we could see the ferocity and courage of the local soldiers in defending their homes and their homeland. And it's, I think, very important to think about that, even though it's something that is perhaps glossed over sometimes, or, because the fall of Singapore is such an important event. But it's also important to recognize their sacrifices and the contributions that they made to the defense of Singapore and Malaya.
And Rachel, how is the museum then making it relevant, if you like, through to the revamp for younger Singaporeans who've not sort of gone through that period or may not know too much about it?
Yeah, so I think with exhibitions, we always try not to force history to be relevant, but allow visitors to learn and to get a better sense of what happened and reach that conclusion themselves. So in a sense, they're gaining another way of looking at the world and how we came to be here. So we are trying to provide that larger context of the battle, including the history of the regiment, the history of the bungalow itself, and getting people to think about Bukit Chandu as something where all of these elements really come together, and as a place that is still here and still something that people can visit. So because of its location, it's also something that might affect someone who lives nearby, for example, or how it ties in with what the area has become today. So there are all these like local and localized elements that people can use to find relevant to their lives today. History has, I guess, also become... Sorry.
Rachel,
so history has also become,
Rachel, I was going to say that, some of our viewers may have visited Reflections at Bukit Chandu in the past, but there have been some significant changes with this opening. New artefacts, as an example, they've been added. How did the museum actually acquire these pieces?
So we took the opportunity to display a lot of artifacts that came from the National Museum's collection, but there are also some interesting artifacts that were recovered during the process of revamping, including an archaeological dig that we did with ICs in 2019, where we went around the bungalow site as well as the site of the hill to uncover layers of history. And so we have different artifacts from the 1920s and 30s, for example, a roof tile, to the 1950s, for example, conditioning tablets that were used for dogs, and all the way to the 1980s and 90s with personal artifacts from possibly workers around the area. So it's really interesting to see all these layers of history intersect. And we also had a very interesting donation, actually, from a family who used to live around the Pasir Panjang area. And they used to go metal detecting in the 1970s, and they actually dug up a lot of these bullets that were probably from the battle itself. So that was a very fortuitous coincidence that they then came to us to offer these bullets to us, especially because a battle site has very little artifacts that you can actually get, given the destructive nature of a battle. So we were very heartened to be able to get these artifacts and put them on display.
Yeah, it certainly was a good find. Thanks so much, Rachel, for coming and speaking to us all about it. Rachel Eng, Assistant Curator from the National Museum of Singapore.